everybody, and welcome, bienvenue, Watguanue Radu, to Teach, Learn, Share, a podcast that thoughtfully explores teaching and learning practices in higher ed. I'm Jasmine Parent, a learning technology consultant at Teaching and Learning Services at McGill University, and I'm joined today by my co-host for this podcast series, Dr. Carolyn Samuel, the Associate Director of Faculty and Teaching Development at TLS.
Thanks, Jasmine. So in this podcast series, which we've called Course Design with Sustainability in Mind, we've been exploring ways to design or redesign courses to raise students' awareness of multiple facets of sustainability. And we've talked about the value of examples to broaden our conception of the relevance of sustainability across the disciplines, and to illustrate how notions of sustainability can be designed into all different types of courses, like in a music course or an engineering course, or a 19th and 20th century Hispanic literature course. And that's the example we're going to hear about today. For me, there isn't really an obvious connection between sustainability and literature. So when I heard that, I thought, what's that going to look like? But the course we're going to be hearing about today considers the influences of the past on the present with the notion of the three pillars of sustainability in mind, those three pillars that we've talked about before, which are economic, social, and environmental. All of those are touched on in this course design. I know that a major goal of this course was to make the course content relevant to students today. And students care about sustainability. So how do we bring that into the context of Hispanic literature? So Jasmine, if you'd like to introduce our guests, let's go ahead and then we'll get the conversation going.
Absolutely. Today, joining us on the podcast are Cristina Carnemola and Daniel Salas. Cristina is an assistant professor of Hispanic and Italian studies in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. Cristina obtained her PhD from Duke University, and she specializes in 19th century literature and cultural history. Cristina has a book project on the go that examines the emergence of narrative and rhetoric patterns within the context of the unclear and unstable meaning of race and nation-building discourses in Italy, Spain, Peru, and Argentina. In addition to research, Cristina has a strong commitment to teaching, which has been fostered by an American Association of Teachers of Italian Teaching Black Italy grant, and she has a diploma in second language teaching from Ca' Foscari University, a leading institution in the teaching of Italian to foreigners. Daniel is a PhD student in Hispanic Studies in the Department of Language, Literatures, and Cultures. He holds a master's degree in medieval history and literature in the Islamic and Christian worlds from Lyon Lumière University. He has completed 2 bachelor's degrees, one in literary studies from Universidad Nacional de Colombia in Bogota, and one in Arabic studies from Aix-Marseille and Lyon Lumière universities. His research interests include medieval and early modern Spanish literature, as well as medieval Islamic history and literature in Arabic and Persian languages. Daniel is interested in studying and fostering connections between Latin America and in the Middle East. Cristina and Daniel, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So the course that we're going to be talking about today is a little bit different, as Carolyn mentioned, than the one that we've explored in a previous episode. The example that we talked about in an earlier episode was a redesign of a course that was taught before. The course that we're exploring today is essentially a design from scratch, so to speak. So Cristina, can you please walk us through describing the course that you designed? And it would be helpful to know the topic, roughly the number of students that you're expecting, the year of study of your students, things like this.
Yes, thank you for having us today. And I'm so glad that you decided to invite us to speak a little bit more about our course. I was hired now 1 year and a half ago. So I'm quite new to ISP and ISP studies in our department. And I was thinking about new ways to get students to take our courses. And so I was thinking about that. And when I was in the metro, I was looking at our students, like students of our age, and they were always scrolling on Instagram with their phones, looking for recipes or looking for new outfits. And I was, it would be cool if we had some like that in our courses. But of course, I'm a scholar of 19th century literature. And how do you match these two things? So I thought about it. And then I was, wait a minute, like all of the writers that have been studied so far had written about that in different formats, either in recipe books, which were a huge thing in the 19th century, on magazines, and also in conduct books. So I decided to make a proposal, and my proposal was accepted by the staff. And I was a fellow with Danielle. We worked together to put together a syllabus that was addressing all of that. So basically, in our course, our students, which will be roughly 40, this is the cap. I will be offering this course in January 2026. The title of the course will be ISP 358, Gender and Textualities. So students will be confronted with texts that address gender and different formats of texts like recipes, articles, or conduct books entries. And they will think about different ways in which gender shapes also genres, and the way in which these authors were kind of the influencers of those epochs, like because we will be looking at texts from the 19th century to the 20th century, both in Spain and Latin America. So students will have a wide range of texts to read.
I'm really fascinated by this. You've given us some interesting background about the course. You're focusing on recipes, and you mentioned also conduct books. Can you say a little bit more about what kind of content we find in a conduct book?
Yes. So the conduct book were manuals in which women could find examples on how to behave in their daily life. So basically, if they were having a lunch and they had guests, what to do, how to prepare, or if they were going to the theater, what they need to do to prepare, what they need to put on in terms of clothing. So it was basically kind of, that's why I was talking before about the influencers of the epoch, because the people that were writing those kind of texts were basically giving to the women that were reading those texts examples on how to behave, on what to do, on what to wear, what to eat, how to present themselves in society. So this is kind of the content that you will find in conduct books.
So now we have a sense of where the gender piece comes into this. Yeah, that's clear. Okay, I'd just like to come back to something that you mentioned earlier. You said that your course redesign was accepted by the CEF. So the CEF is the Sustainability Education Fellows Program that McGill ran for a couple of years. And you were part of the second cohort. So maybe we could talk a little bit about sustainability, because that's really the heart of the CEF program. So you've got a course that focuses on literature. You're addressing gender and textualities. The content deals with recipes, conduct books, and the like. Where exactly does sustainability fit in? Like, how did you design your course to foster sustainability?
So in terms of sustainability, we thought about it like starting from, for example, the recipes. So let's say our course is going to be divided into two. We have a focus on food, and the other focus is going to be fashion. Students are interested in those content, and thematically, basically in our course, it's easy to think about, for example, recipes in a way in which they can be sustainable or not. So if our students are scrolling and think that eating a sandwich avocado is something healthy today, is it sustainable if we are doing it in Montreal and this avocado has been traveling from Mexico to arrive here? So we want our students to make these kind of connections. So they are going to read about how these recipes were born and if they were sustainable, because when they originally were written in the 19th century, a lot of these recipe books were basically written for women from the bourgeoisie who had not a lot of income. They were living on the money that their husbands were giving to them. So they had to use the money that they were given to feed large families. So in those terms, the food that they were cooking and the recipes that they were reading were meant to feed a large number of children. They needed to be healthy. The food that they were buying needed to be like cheap. So in this sense, the food that they were cooking was sustainable, like from different points of view. Theoretically, we are also trying to address putting together literature that comes from both from Latin America and from Spain, and address the theme of sustainability both in the 19th century and today. So we want our students to be exposed to this kind of literature. And there is a large literature addressing this topic in the Anglophone world, but not so much in Spain and Latin America. So we had some challenges, and Danielle is going to speak about that later on. And also, we wanted our students to go outside from the class and to make connection with our community of Latino people here in Montreal. And so we designed the course with in a way in which it's going to be project-based, and our students are going to go outside the class and discover restaurants and also shops that sell clothing that come from Latin America and from Spain here in Montreal, so that they can strengthen connections with the Hispanic community here. So basically, the values of that inspired us while we were putting together this syllabus were central in the way in which we did it, because we wanted students to reflect also on their practices as consumers. We wanted our students to think about the ways in which a text in the 19th century could inspire women not to behave in certain ways. And if we have a comparison with today, we wanted our students to think about it to think how Instagram plays a role on our lives when we are eating, as I was saying, a sandwich with avocado. So are we doing it because we want to do it, or are we doing it because we are influenced by someone else who is saying that this is an healthy practice, And so these were the questions that inspired us.
So I'm curious then, how does this translate into learning outcomes for students? You've given us a sense of the content and how sustainability fits in. So all of this is somehow translated into learning outcomes that are articulated to students. Can you give us examples? And I know that you've reflected on different types of learning outcomes, so cognitive, but also affective. Would you be able to give a couple of examples?
Yes. So in terms of the cognitive one, we have our students to work with the magazines, conduct, and recipe books that have been created within a specific model of how gender was conceived in the 19th century. And so we want our students to be able then to compare these models and the models of women that are created nowadays by different social media, for example. And we want our students to compare their own practices with the practices of women in the 19th century. And also, we want them to assess their own practices in terms of sustainability. So by the end of our course, our students will have also the means to assess their own practices as consumers. We want our students to read literature also about sustainability and to see, for example, as I was saying, is this practice that I'm having as a consumer something that is positive in terms of our footprint, or is it something that is even if it should be healthy, is creating new problems in our society?
And I think it's a really example of how the course content becomes relevant to students today. Can you give us an example of an affective learning outcome as well?
To speak about our affective outcomes, I need to speak about something that we learned while we were in this journey with the SAC program. As Caroline explained before, we had the means to put together this course because we were supported by also teaching and learning services. And we learned about something that was called alignment. We didn't even know at the beginning what was that. And so we learned that basically when we are designing our learning outcomes, we have also to think about the ways in which we are going to assess them at the end. And so what I will say, our course is going to be project based. And so it means that we want our students to create a community in which they can share also their practices. And this community is not going to be only inside of the class, but is going to be also outside, because we want also our students to strengthen these connections between what's McGill and what's outside of McGill. And so these connections are going to be the base of these effective learning outcomes that we want to them to create. And in terms of how they are going to do that, I think I don't want to speak that much, because I think that Daniele is going to reply this question later.
It's okay. Maybe we can just go to Daniel right now.
Sure. So one thing we always emphasize with students when we're working with texts that are, well, in this case, over a century old and more, is the importance of staying connected with the world we live like today. So it's crucial not just to look back, but also to engage with the present and ask oneself how practices in the past shape our understanding in the world we live today. And so a big part of that is bringing in the life of a culture, Spanish-speaking culture right here in Montreal. For you to have an idea of how it works, I'd like to share some details of the project, of how is it going to be, which gives students a chance to explore aspects of Hispanic traditions and, of course, always thinking about sustainability. So in the project, which will be developed throughout the whole semester, the students have two options: Hispanic food in Montreal or Hispanic outfits in Montreal. So let's say if the students choose the Hispanic food option, first they would have to work in groups and choose a Hispanic recipe that we had worked during the semester in the recipe books. Then each group member will research and choose an ingredient from the recipe. So the goal here is to explore history, production methods, and trace back how ingredients come to Montreal. So imagine they will go to, for example, Saint-Hubert near Jean Talon. They will go and explore Hispanic food markets, restaurants. They will have to document their experience. They will have to analyze the labels of these products, or simply ask, maybe in Spanish, to the people that work in the markets or restaurants, where do these ingredients come from? Where do these products come from? It's a great opportunity for them to exchange information about maybe ingredients or products that are shared in different recipes in different countries. And of course, ideas. It's like a great opportunity for peer learning. Later on, each group will be expected to deliver written reflection piece on the original recipe, on the historical recipe, on the historical context of the cookbook, the intended audience, and sustainability. Once this is done, think about the relevance of this recipe today. So here they will have to find a modern version on the recipe and compare it to the original. And here is where social media comes to mind. So we're expecting them to analyze the difference in language, ingredients, and audience that, let's say, the YouTuber uses today, and the strategies the cookbook used 100 years ago. So finally, they will have to create a 5-minute video recipe of this traditional dish, showcasing the chosen ingredients and how is it sustainable or not in Montreal. And last but not least, they will have to reflect on the whole process of updating the recipe, the sustainability, and of course, the collaboration that they had during the group work. So in general, in both options, the goal is not only to drive into the cultural richness of Hispanic traditions, but also to critically engage with how these practices have evolved over time, especially when considering issues like sustainability.
It makes me think they'll be going to the market in January or, in the winter. And I'm wondering if, seasonality is going to play an impact in there, because that'll be very different than visiting the market in August, for example. But I'd imagine that could be an element of their analysis, if they do see produce and whatnot that are being offered that are not in season. There's definitely a sustainability aspect to it. Thanks so much, Daniel. So before I move into the next question, I just wanted to touch on something we were talking about earlier. And I wanted to say that I can appreciate the challenge that instructors encounter when designing learning outcomes that are effective. I have come across that myself in supporting instructors. They're quite tricky, not so much to identify the outcome, but to potentially evaluate the outcome. And so the next question that we're going to be asking is about what some of the challenges were in this course. And I can anticipate maybe that might be one of them. But to balance that out, I'm wondering if you could talk about some things that went well in the course design process and some things that were challenging.
You are right. Like assessment was a big piece when we were reflecting on how to make it. We hope that students will enjoy the new format, and also in terms of assessment and making it also sustainable for the instructor, because a project-based course with 40 students designed as we have designed it, it's going to be a lot of grading. So I hope that I will survive after giving it, and it's going to be sustainable also for myself. And also students will think in different ways critically about challenges in the sustainable world, but also in terms of gender. They have to think about intersectionality, which is something that maybe not all of our listeners know what intersectionality is. Intersectionality is basically how gender, class, and race play all a role in the way in which we behave. And so we want our students to think about that. And we want our students to identify these patterns inside of the text that they are analyzing, but also to think about themselves. So when they are relating with their peers in class, they have to think about how the way in which these different components make sense altogether, and how these components have an influence in the way in which they behave as consumers. Not only when they are buying something and they decide to buy fast fashion instead of buying something that is pricier and will last a little bit longer. We know that our students are on a budget, and so a lot of our students will buy something that is cheaper because don't have a lot of means. But what will be different if instead they will go to free? Here there are a lot of free, how can they change their behaviors? And so we want to inspire our students, and these were the values that where our values will come to light and will play a major role in this course. Now, we want our students to think about their values. We will share with them some values that inspired us when we were putting together the syllabus, but we want our students to reflect on themselves and to think about that. A lot of times we are going to fast food chains or to buy fast food because we don't have a lot of time, but we want them to reflect on this and how this has an impact on them, on the larger community, and what will cause in the future if we continue with these practices. But then to go to the challenges, maybe Daniel can explain a little bit more what were the challenges that we encountered.
Well, maybe picking up also on intersectionality, the fact that we wanted to bring new voices into the syllabus. It is not always easy to align how sustainability is thought today, 100 years ago, but also how indigenous communities, for example, in Latin America, think about that. So in a theoretical point of view, for example, in the Hispanic context, we don't have one word for sustainability, we have two. So one of the challenges is which one to use, what are the difference between both of them. So still today I'm not very sure of what is the difference between sostenibilidad and sustentabilidad. In that sense, the effort to bring other voices to the construction of sustainability, how sustainability is think of, the components or the pillars or the dimensions of sustainability, it is not always the same. So for instance, some indigenous peoples of America as a continent, have alternative visions on sustainability, and they are producing knowledge that may or may not be aligned, to the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, which is like the base of our fellowship and, all the ideas and values. So I would say that put this in conversation during the course is going to be one of the biggest challenges.
Thank you, Danielle. I can totally appreciate how important and really crucial it is to bring different voices into a topic like sustainability, and with needing to do that, how complex that can be, especially when different communities have slightly different definitions, have slightly different words. As you said, in Latin America and in Spanish, there are 2 words for sustainability, and you're not even completely sure which one is the better one to use. So I can appreciate how that may be a challenge for designing a course with sustainability in mind. It does sound like such an interesting course, though, and I would love to take it. So we're going to wrap up now. And while we wrap up, I just wanted to ask, what advice do you have for instructors who would like to design or redesign a course with sustainability in mind?
Even with the challenges, it was a very satisfying experience to design the course. But something that made it satisfying was to design the course from the bottom up compared to what we traditionally thought course design is. So what I mean is that I would advise to start thinking about first the values of the course that you want to give in this course. And in this case, the sustainability lens that we wanted to bring in. And then moving to the purpose of the course, in the context of the department or the program you're in. And only then start reflecting about learning outcomes, pedagogies, assessments, and so on. And I think in this way, even content at the end will come very, very naturally. So maybe this is like a very specific thing for our course. In other literature courses, you have to start with the canon and talk about these big authors and books. But in this case, it was a very, very interesting experience to design the course from the values that we can give to students.
Yes, and also sometimes we think about the content and we think that we can be also influenced so much that we don't feel that the content that we are going to teach is connected to sustainability. And so we don't think that we can design a course on sustainability even if we are in a literature department, Instead, if we think about the texts that we want to teach in different ways, also our course on literature can talk about sustainability in different ways. And so another advice that I will give to instructors will be, don't feel threatened about sustainability. Sometimes the connections are easier than what we think. And so sustainability can be embedded in any course, as we have done. So it is a matter of being creative.
I think that's the most significant takeaway for me from this conversation. It's exactly what you just said, Daniel and Christina, that sustainability pervades everything in our life. It's everywhere. And if instructors reflect on the intersection with their course content, there will inevitably be ways to bring sustainability into the courses. So I'm not going to do any more of a wrap up. I think that's a pretty good takeaway. And Jasmine, I'll hand it off to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We'd like to thank you both, Christina and Daniel, for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And as a reminder, please subscribe to Teach, Learn, Share podcast and share the link with others. Until next time.